Hi everyone, today I'll be working through the problems in lesson 714 with you. So let's take a look at problem 739 first. Are we there yet? The Sutton family took a trip to see the mountains in Rocky Mountain National Park. Linda and her brother Lee kept asking, "Are we there yet?" At one point their mother answered, "No, but I can tell you is that we have driven 100 miles and we are about 2/5 of the way there." Linda turned to Lee and asked, "How long is this trip anyway?" They each started thinking about whether they could determine the length of the trip from the information they were given. So if we take a look at A, we need to explain how both Linda's work and Lee's work illustrate the situation described by their mother. And what does X represent in each diagram? Let's start with that. So you'll notice that we do have an X in each diagram. So remember, we can use a variable, and most oftentimes in Math 7, you will see an X to represent an unknown. So remember, that is a variable. So that is what our X represents. And that would be the total distance that they need to go. So remember, that is what we are trying to figure out. Because Linda turned to Lee and she asked, "How long is this trip?" And they know, again, if you notice in their problems, there is a 100 here and a 100 here. So that represents the total amount that they have traveled so far. And you will also notice that we have a 2/5 and a 2/5. So keep in mind this 2/5, that represents the portion that they have traveled so far. So that 100 miles is 2/5 of the total distance that they have to travel. So again, X represents the total distance. 100 miles is how far they have traveled so far, and 2/5 is the portion of the trip that they have traveled. All right, let's look at B. What equation could represent this situation? Use the scale factor or multiplier to represent this situation in an equation. Let X represent the total distance in miles. So again, if we're using our scale factor or our multiplier to represent this situation in an equation, that scale factor is 2/5. So we would have 2/5. All right, they're telling us let X represent the total distance in miles. So we'll put that in after our scale factor. And we know that 2/5 X equals 100 or 100 miles. And finally, we have part C. Is the answer going to be more or less than 100 miles? Explain your thinking. So let's take a look back at Linda and Lee's work for a minute. And we know that if we take a look at Linda's method, we can see that they have traveled 100 miles, but that is only 2/5 of the trip. We can also see that in Lee's method, that we have gone 2/5 of the trip, which is only 100 miles. So if we are trying to determine, let me get back to the problem here. So they wanted to know for C, is the answer going to be more or less than 100 miles? Well, keep in mind what we're trying to answer is how far is their total trip. So, you've really got to use logic to work through this. I mean, they've already gone 100 miles, and that's 2/5 of the way. So they're not even halfway there yet. So if that is the case, then the distance must be more than 100 miles. Now remember, they have already driven 100 miles. And they are only partway there. All right, that is all for problem 739.